The September inflation report was just released, and CPI inflation rose by 0.4%, which is more than expected. So, what I want to do is give you all the important numbers so you know them, and then I want to talk about what they mean for you, for me, for the Fed, and for inflation rates. So, let's do just that, starting with all the important numbers. So, CPI inflation did rise by 0.4%. This is higher than the expected 0.3%, and this is on a month-to-month basis. It also rose 3.7%, which is higher than the 3.6% that was expected. Now, there is a difference between CPI inflation and core inflation, and the Federal Reserve cares heavily about core inflation. Core inflation removes volatile assets like food prices and energy prices. Now, core inflation was in line with expectations. This was a 0.3% increase overall on a month-to-month basis and a 4.1% increase on a year-over-year basis. Now, the main difference between core inflation and CPI inflation, in my opinion, is that we, the consumers, we feel CPI inflation more. When we go places, when we go to buy food, and when we go anywhere, we have to buy fuel. So even though the Federal Reserve cares about core inflation, which removes volatile assets, you and I, we feel CPI inflation more. Okay, let's continue going over the numbers. So, overall, to make up this report, we can break down these numbers on a asset per asset basis. Now, the first is energy prices. Energy prices were up 1.5%. This is what you and I feel when we go fill up our gas tanks. Food costs rose 3.7%. This is what we feel when we go to the grocery store. Okay, so even though core inflation was in line with expectations, CPI inflation is increasing at a higher than expected rate. Now, services are up 5.5%, or excuse me, 5.7%. You have to understand, services are a core or a key factor for the Federal Reserve when it comes to the fight against inflation. They look at services and the increasing prices in services because these, for them, are foretelling on a longer term basis. So they want to see this number in particular come down. Now, you also have to understand services, right? What is the United States economy based on or built on? We have what is known as a service-based economy. So a lot of our GDP does not necessarily come from building things or exporting things, although those are parts of the economy. A lot of the economy comes from services like tech, financial services, etc. And that is why the Fed looks so closely at this number when it comes to judging or gauging overall inflation. So, energy up, food costs up, services up. All these are still up. Now, some mixed bag items are new vehicles and used vehicles. So, there's been some talk that the car market is going to crash, and right now, I'm still uncertain if we're going to see a major crash or not. I do have a video coming specifically on that subject. So if you're not subscribed, make sure to do so you don't miss it. But right now, we have new vehicle prices still rising by 0.3%. With that said, used vehicles did come down by 2.5%. So again, mixed bag. This is giving mixed signals. And on top of that, when we are in an environment where we are having higher and higher prices, the fact that used vehicles are starting to come down does signal a softening in that market. And new vehicle prices, although they are up, they are only up 0.3%. So very interesting to look at. And on top of that, while that is not something that we feel on a day-to-day basis, it is a major purchase. So vehicle prices, people aren't buying new vehicles every single day, but every few years, maybe. So it is one of the major purchases that we make as citizens. Now, here's where it gets interesting. And I always say this, okay? I always say that inflation does not really matter if wages raise or rise higher than the inflation rate. What is going on right now is that wages are not keeping up with inflation. If wages match or exceed inflation, they are not so much a problem to us because real wealth and real earning power goes up. When inflation outpaces wage growth, we are actually losing real earning power, even if wages are going up. So that is why inflation can be so dangerous, and why high inflation can be dangerous is because when you have high inflation, it most certainly almost always outpaces wage growth. So wages fell month to month 0.2%. With that said, they are up year over year 0.5%. But this is where it gets interesting and where you can really see what we, the consumer, are feeling. Wages went up 0.5% on a year-to-year basis, okay? But CPI inflation is still rising at a 3.7% year-over-year basis. So you see the difference of almost it is 3.2% where inflation is outpacing wages. So when you have that separation between the two, you feel poorer, which is what the entire country is feeling right now. People are feeling poorer. And really, there is some talk, and I want to make a video on this. There is some talk from economists that really the top 10% of wage earners is what's propping up the economy. And the rest of the United States population is actually feeling suffering and actually feeling the pressure, even though we have an economy that is not in recession yet. So I do want to make a video on that. But what I want you to take away from this is that no matter what the CPI numbers are or the core inflation numbers are, they are outpacing wage growth, and they are outpacing wage growth significantly. And that is what you and I feel when we go places and things feel more expensive. Okay? If things raise by, if eggs last year cost $3 and now they cost $6, but your salary went from $60,000 to $180,000, no one would care. It becomes a problem when it outpaces wage growth. So that is something to take into account. Now what I want to do is talk about what this report means for you and I, what it means for the Federal Reserve in the fight against inflation, and what it means for the overall economy and the environment that we're going to be operating in for the foreseeable future. So let's do just that. If I haven't said this already, my name is Derek, and I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. If this video has been helpful so far, please consider subscribing. This is a YouTube channel, a relatively new YouTube channel, and it is something that I'm passionate about. So every subscription does help tremendously. And don't forget to turn on bell notifications. New videos come out every Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday when something like this needs to be talked about. Okay, let's talk about what this means for you and I, and more importantly, for the fight against inflation. So remember, the Federal Reserve meets, all right, on November 1st. This is where they are going to decide whether to raise rates or not for that meeting. Now, the general consensus is a above 80% chance that they will not raise rates on that meeting. With that said, there is a general consensus also that the Federal Reserve is most likely going to raise rates at least one more time in this economic cycle. Right now, rates are 5.5%. That is what is known as the federal funds rate. That does not mean your mortgage or your credit card interest rate, etc., or your car loan. That means the federal funds rate, which influences directly all of those other mortgage rates, car rates, interest rates, savings rates, etc. Okay? So, the general consensus, even with this report, they most likely will not raise rates on the November meeting. With that said, they have one more meeting before the end of the year. They have a November meeting, and after that, they have a December meeting. So there is still chance that they raise rates in December. Now, the Federal Reserve Governor, Michelle Bowman, did say that it is likely that she said it is appropriate, or most likely appropriate, that we raise rates one more time. So there probably is going to be a rate increase. With that said, regardless of whether the rates stay at 5.5%, which is what they are now, or if they raise to 5.75% or even 6%, we are going to operate in a high interest rate environment for the foreseeable future. Because once rates hit their peak rate, all right, they're going to remain there for quite some time. Now, some people say 3 months, some people say 6 months, some people say 9 months. In reality, I don't think anyone knows, not even the Fed. With that said, based on all the data and how sticky inflation has proved to be and how low wages have been able to keep up with inflation, I do believe that the Federal Reserve is going to keep rates higher for longer. So Whatever the general consensus is, it's probably going to be on the longer side. So if the general consensus is between 3 or 6 months, it's going to be probably 6 months. If the general consensus is between 6 months and a year, it's probably going to be closer to the year. Okay? That's just the environment that we're operating in, and it has to do with the fact that inflation seems to be sticky, and it seems to, I don't want to say this, but it seems, and I don't, knock on wood, but it seems to be, for lack of a better word, getting comfortable in the 3% range, right? And the Federal Reserve wants interest rates at around 2%. That is the target rate. Why? Because that spurs economic growth. It allows prices to continue to raise, but it is not so much that it is shocking to you or I when we go to the grocery store or when we buy new clothes, etc. And it allows some breathing room for wages to try and keep up with inflation. Okay? So until the overall core inflation number is around 2%, the Federal Reserve is going to be more likely to keep rates higher. Okay. Now, again, you and I, we feel CPI inflation. Core inflation is what the Federal Reserve cares about. But us as consumers, we feel CPI inflation. We feel the volatile prices. And what's scary is that CPI inflation is more volatile than core inflation. So, and here's the thing, your wages are not volatile, right? Your wages do not raise by 100% one month and then fall by 50% the next month. They're pretty much stable. And they if you're lucky, go up slightly every single month. But most likely they don't. So because of that, when CPI inflation, because it's volatile, we directly feel gas prices. We directly feel heating prices. And remember, we're moving into winter. So that means that those heating prices are going to go higher. Those are energy prices. So electricity, gas prices, propane, those usually tend to move higher in winter because people are heating their homes more. So we feel those things more. We feel the CPI more than we feel core. Yet the Federal Reserve cares more about core than they do about CPI because it's easier on a month-to-month basis to see progress. So I think I gave you all the numbers. We're going to wrap up this video by just giving you a summary here. So you are informed. So CPI inflation rose 4.4%. That is higher than expected. 3.7% year over year. That is higher than expected. Core inflation rose 4.1% year over year. That is in line with expectations, and 0.3% on a month-to-month basis. Energy prices are up, food costs are up, and services, which are a key factor for the Federal Reserve, are up. All of them are up. New vehicles are up slightly. Used vehicles are down significantly, 2.5%. Wages are not keeping up with inflation. That is the big takeaway here. Because if that were different, this wouldn't matter. Nobody would be bitching. But because the fact that inflation is outpacing wages by so much, it is a problem for the average American. Okay? Wages fell this month, 0.2%. They're only up 0.5% on a year-over-year basis. The Federal Reserve meets on November 1st. They will make their decision on whether to raise rates or not. It is most likely that they will not, although it is likely that they will raise rates in the future. And last but not least, we are going to operate in a high interest rate environment for longer. They're going to hold rates higher for longer, whether that is 5.5%, 5.75%, or 6%. All of those are higher than we are accustomed to in the most recent economic cycle, which can go back to around 2007 and 2008. For the significant amount of our history, at least recently, rates have been a lot lower. So that is why they feel higher. Although historically, rates have been a lot higher in the past. All right, but for about 30 years, they are very, very high. All right, I hope this video was informative. I hope this video was helpful, and I hope this video keeps you up to date on what's going on with inflation and with what most likely the Federal Reserve will do in the future. As always, my name is Derek, and I got my degree in finance. You don't have to. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, please consider subscribing. It costs you nothing, and it helps this relatively new channel tremendously. And I will see you in the next video. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Take care.